Oh, you're not family anymore, Mom. My son said it with a calm so cruel it chilled the wine in my glass. The room froze. Forks dangled midair. The smell of cinnamon hem thickened. A single cranberry rolled off the edge of a plate. I blinked at him. Gregory, my only child. The boy I raised on government paychecks and secondhand coats. The man now sitting at the head of the table I bought. His wife leaned back in her chair, smirking. Her red lipstick didn't even twitch. From now on, Gregory continued, we make the decisions. A log snapped in the fireplace. He lifted his glass. Merry Christmas. I didn't move, couldn't. My fingers rested on the embroidered napkin in my lap. When I'd stitched the year, he turned 10. He was erasing me with a toast. My heart thundered in my ears. My mouth went dry. I scanned the table. My grandkids looked down, cheeks pink with shame or cold. The tree sparkled behind them. Tiny lights blinking like lies. I brought the pie, I said quietly. Gregory didn't answer. Paige picked up her wine and took a long, slow sip. The pecan pie sat on the counter, untouched. I had baked it with trembling hands that morning, every stir full of hope. Now it looked like a relic. You knew this was coming, Mom, Gregory added, as if that softened the blow. It's time you let go. Let go. I held him when he cried over scraped knees. I delivered mail in snow up to my knees so he could acknowledge I gave him my life, my savings, my silence. Let go? Paige was whispering now, her voice sharp as frost. Ellie, my 17-year-old granddaughter, sat rigid. Her eyes flicked toward me and back to her plate. No one defended me. I reached for my handbag, felt the envelope. Not yet. I stood, the chair scraping loud against hardwood. No one looked up. I walked to the pie, straightened the foil, smoothed my sweater. The silence screamed. I hope it still tastes right, I said. My voice didn't crack. No one moved. I turned. Looked Gregory in the eye. Thank you for the clarity, I said. It helps. I walked out the front door into the snow. Behind me, the door clicked shut. They thought I had nothing left. But paper speaks louder than blood. I used to wake before dawn, lace up my old postal shoes, and step into snow so deep it swallowed my ankles. The wind in Syracuse bit through my gloves like I wore paper. But I never let it stop me. Gregory was 7 then. Every morning before my shift, I packed his lunch. PB&J, apple slices, sometimes a little note tucked inside. You are loved. Mom, I still remember the smell of those brown paper bags. They came to symbolize everything. Warmth, effort, a kind of invisible love. I wonder if he remembers any of it. The post office on West Genesee had yellowing walls and flickering fluorescents. The coffee was burnt, the lockers dented. Still, I smiled. Those were the days I felt useful. I walked 12 miles most days, knees aching, back stiff. But my route passed by the elementary school. Some afternoons, I'd catch a glimpse of Gregory at recess, his red hoodie flying as he ran. He never saw me, but I waved anyway. Christmas was the hardest. I never had money for grand gifts. So I made things. I crocheted a red scarf one year, stitched G at the end in an even yarn. He wore it once, lost it the same winter. I didn't cry. I told myself kids forget. That's what mothers do. We excuse things. But now, decades later, his words still echo like frostbite. You're not family anymore. It hit harder than any snowstorm I ever trudged through. I stood there, holding that gravy boat, cranberry sauce congealing under fluorescent lights. No scarf I ever made could warm me now. He was 23 when he first said, "One day I'll buy you a house, Mom." We were in our tiny kitchen, steam rising from chip mugs. Gregory had just gotten into business school, and I'd baked a meatloaf to celebrate. "I'll make it big." He grinned. "And you'll never have to carry another mailbag again." I believed him. Of course I did. That year I withdrew the last of my 41K, not for a cruise, not for a new furnace, for his tuition gap. I took on double shifts, wore the same coat 5 winters straight, boiled potatoes 3 ways to make ends meet. When he opened his first dealership, I handed him a 10,000 check. No questions, no paperwork, just the mother who said, "It's yours, sweetheart." He called me his angel. That stuck for a while. The day he bought his first home with Paige, I stood on the porch holding a quilt I'd made for their baby. He smiled. She didn't. I thought she was tired. I made excuses. That first Christmas in their house, I arrived with pie and poinsettias. Paige answered the door and said, "Oh, we didn't think you'd come inside. There's no space." No space. I sat in my car that night, watching snow gather on the windshield, hands wrapped around a cooling pie. But I kept giving. Babysat when Paige traveled. Paid for Ellie's braces. Drove 2 hours just to deliver soup when they caught the flu. Mother's Day, a 2-word text, "Thanks, Mom." Ski no card, no hug. The invitations slowed. My name stopped appearing in family group chats. Gregory changed the locks and never offered me a new key. One time I asked if I could stay for dinner. Paige looked up and said, "We're trying to keep things simple, Marjorie." Simple? That night I made myself a grilled cheese in silence. Even the toaster felt louder than my life. Still, I told myself, they're busy. They'll come around. But deep down, somewhere between the lost scarf and the locked doors, I knew I wasn't part of their future. I was their past, and they were working hard to leave me there. It started in the kitchen. Gregory stood at the counter, shuffling papers, bills, insurance letters. I was rinsing dishes, warm water, lemon soap. The window above the sink steamed with winter breath. "Mom," he said flatly, "you really shouldn't touch the finances anymore." I turned off the tap. "Why's that?" I asked gently. He didn't look up. Paige walked in, heels clicking on tile. She slid her sunglasses onto her head. Even indoors, she wore that shield. "She doesn't even know how to log into her own bank app," Paige said. My heart paused. Gregory chuckled. "I mean, it's not her fault." Paige added, "You grew up with checks and stamps, right? That's practically extinct." I wiped my hands on my apron. Felt the wet cotton cling to my palms. "I know how to manage my own money," I said, each word slow, deliberate. Gregory sighed. "It's not about knowing, it's about trusting someone younger, someone. Capable. He used to beg me to balance his savings book in high school. I used to slide coins into his sock drawer for field trips. "I've paid every bill in my life on time," I said. "That's not the point," Paige cut in. "You're 71, Marjorie. That's a lot. It's time to simplify. A lot." My age was now a liability, my life a burden. I glanced at the fridge. Still had Ellie's crayon drawing of a house with Grandma's home scrawled at the top, faded. Forgotten. I folded the dish rag slowly, set it on the counter like it was glass. "I'm not asking for control," I said. "I just want to stay informed." Gregory finally turned toward me. His eyes weren't cruel, just cold. "You don't need to be involved anymore," he said. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." The words settled like smoke in the room. Harder for who? My throat tightened, but I nodded. Didn't speak. Inside I began writing, not on paper, but in memory. The tone, the shift, the moment I became an inconvenience. 2 days later, Paige brought it up. I was at their house again. Ellie had forgotten her science project and Gregory was too busy to drop it at school. I'd barely stepped inside when Paige spoke. "We've been talking," she said, arms crossed. "Maybe it's time to consider simplifying." Simplifying? I set the project folder on the table. The dining room still smelled like burnt toast and air freshener. "You mean for you?" I asked, feigning softness. She offered a tight smile. "For everyone. You've got that big old house all to yourself. 4 bedrooms, 1 person. Doesn't that feel excessive?" I stared at her. She was barely 36, a woman who'd never worked a job without central heating, who used the word excessive like she knew what loneliness felt like. "I like my space," I replied calmly. She tilted her head. "I mean, come on, Marjorie. You could use the money. Assisted living's not cheap, and it's safer. Plus, it's close to us." The words landed one by one, like small rocks in my chest. Assisted living. She was planting seeds, not gently, strategically. "That house was bought with my hands," I said, "and my husband's lungs." As she blinked, I continued, "I carried mail in snowstorms. He worked 30 years in diesel exhaust. That house is not excessive. It's earned." A Paige stepped back, but her eyes didn't soften. I picked up my coat. The air inside felt thinner than the wind outside. Gregory walked in then, tie loose, phone in hand. Paige leaned toward him. "Babe, we talked about the house, remember?" Gregory glanced at me, paused, then nodded slowly. "We just want you to be comfortable, Mom," he said. "That's all." I nodded back, but something broke behind my ribs. I was not confused. I was not fragile. I was being pushed out. That night, I sat in my living room, wrapped in a quilt I'd stitched after Frank died. The clock ticked loud against the quiet. I opened my file cabinet, pulled out every deed, every tax return, every bank statement. Then I picked up a yellow legal pad, and I began to write, not a letter, a list. It came in a manila folder. Gregory handed it to me one Saturday afternoon, right after lunch. Paige had made lentil soup, thick, oddly sweet with too much thyme. I'd eaten it in silence, trying not to grimace. I had just set my spoon down when Gregory cleared his throat. "There's just a little paperwork I need you to look at, Mom." He slid the folder across the table. His tone was calm, too calm. casual, as if this was nothing new. Nothing serious. I opened it slowly. The first page had my name. The second, his. Just a power of attorney, he said quickly. In case something happens. You know, medical stuff, the house. The bank. Just easier for us to manage if needed. Paige leaned forward. It's smart. All our friends have done it with their parents. It's just good planning. Her voice was dipped in honey, but her smile didn't touch her eyes. I looked down at the pages. Dense language. Long clauses. Some parts were underlined. Did a lawyer prepare this? I asked. We used a template, Paige replied smoothly. It's perfectly legal. Just a formality. I glanced up. Gregory wouldn't meet my eyes. He picked up his napkin and folded it. Unfolded it. Folded it again. Paige slid a pen beside me. I highlighted where to sign. She said, her nail tapping the yellow tab. I felt the pressure in the air. Not heavy, but insistent. Like standing near a running fan. Soft wind, steady push. I'd like to take it home, I said. Just to read through everything. Paige hesitated. Gregory spoke quickly.
Of course, Mom. No rush.
We just thought we'd save you a trip. I nodded, but something in my gut stirred. That night, I spread the folder across my dining room table. Papers, sticky notes, a highlighter, my reading glasses. I read every line, twice. And something didn't feel right. There was a clause about managing accounts, another about liquidating assets, another about discretionary control over sale of primary residence. I stared at that line for a long time. Sell the house. No medical condition mentioned, no expiration date, no limitations. I felt a chill run through me. Gregory didn't want to help me. He wanted control. The next morning, I drove to the credit union. Linda, the branch manager, remembered me. Her hair was grayer than before, but her smile was just as kind. What can I help you with today, Mrs. Klein? I'd like to see recent transactions, I said. All of them. Last 6 months. She didn't blink. Printed them, handed them across the desk. I scanned the pages. 43200 withdrawal, check number I didn't recognize. Another Wutterzausen labeled, consultation. Then one that made my stomach twist. 8750 wire transfer to Paige L. Carter. No note. No signature from me, no authorization, I remembered. My hands trembled. Linda, I whispered. Did I sign for these? She looked over her glasses. We have digital signatures on file. But I can pull the records if you'd like. Yes, please. She typed, clicked, frowned. This one was authorized via phone, she said slowly. But the voice verification was under Gregory's ID. I drove home in silence. Didn't turn the radio on. Didn't stop for coffee. I sat in my driveway for a full 20 minutes, watching the wind rustle the hedge Frank had planted 20 years ago. They weren't helping me. They were using me. Piece by piece, bit by bit, they had started taking what I'd built, and now they wanted my name on the paper that gave them permission to take the rest. That evening, I placed the manila folder back on the table. I didn't sign it. I did something else. I opened the fireproof box under my bed, pulled out my original will, the deed, the insurance policy, and a little green notebook I hadn't touched in years. I started writing. Date. Amount. Transfer. Account, question marks in red pen beside each entry. The next time Paige called, I let it ring. When Gregory texted, I replied one word, "Bussy." I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was awake now. The first time I noticed, it was Thanksgiving. There was no invite, no group text, no phone call. Just silence. I checked the calendar twice, thinking maybe I'd confused the date. But no, Thursday had arrived and so had the loneliness. I made a small turkey breast anyway. Mashed sweet potatoes, canned cranberry sauce, because fresh felt too hopeful. The house smelled like memories, like the years when Gregory used to run around with a paper pilgrim hat on his head, like laughter echoing off walls that were now too quiet. Around 3 p.m., I checked my phone. Still nothing. I opened social media. There it was. Paige's post. Grateful for our little family this year. 3 wine glasses. A table set for 5. My chair wasn't among them. No mention of me. Not even a tag. I stared at the screen until the photo blurred. I didn't cry. Instead, I turned off my phone, sat at my own table alone, lit one candle, ate in silence. The weeks that followed only proved what I had started to suspect. I was being erased softly, thoroughly. Group messages dwindled, then vanished. I'd ask Gregory what time Ellie's recital was. "Oh, it's kind of last minute, Mom." "I didn't think you'd want to drive at night." I'd offer to help with groceries. "We've got it covered, thanks." Once, I stopped by unannounced to drop off some old family ornaments. Paige answered the door and didn't even open it all the way. "We're a little overwhelmed right now." she said. Her eyes scanned me like I was a stranger. She took the box and shut the door without a full thank you. Inside that box were ornaments I'd hand-painted in 1986. On one of them, Gregory's initials were still carved in crooked letters. 2T. It was Ellie who saved me from vanishing completely. One Sunday, she showed up at my door with a bag of chocolate croissants. She was 14 now, taller, sharper in speech, but her eyes still kind. "Dad doesn't know I'm here," she whispered. "Neither does Mom." I let her in without a word. We sat on the couch, no TV, just the ticking clock and the smell of warm pastry. "Grandma," she said, "are you okay?" I wanted to say yes, to shield her from the ugly truth, but I also knew she saw it. Children always do long before adults think they will. I brushed her hair behind her ear. "I'm all right, sweetheart. I'm just learning who's who." She looked at me. "You don't deserve this." Her voice cracked. That was the first time in months anyone had said something real to me. We didn't talk much more. But before she left, she turned back at the door and said, "I remember everything you did." "I promise." That night, I lay in bed with the hallway light still on. Sleep didn't come, just memories. The years I'd carried Gregory through flu season alone. The time I sold my wedding ring to pay his tuition balance. The nights I missed dinner to deliver mail in a blizzard. All of it. Washed away with 3 simple acts: no invitation, no response, no name. Kulu. By the end of December, I stopped offering. I stopped asking to help. Stopped asking to visit. I watched instead. I kept a little notebook in the drawer by the phone. Started marking patterns. Dates they didn't call. Bank activity. Mail that felt tampered with. I wasn't paranoid, I was careful. There's a difference. On New Year's Eve, I watched fireworks from my porch, wrapped in Frank's old jacket. A blanket over my knees. The neighborhood was lit with laughter, bottles clinking, music playing behind glass windows. Mine was the only house that didn't echo celebration, and I was okay with that. For the first time, I wasn't begging to belong. I was preparing. It was Paige's birthday. The party was at their house. Big, loud, full of people I barely recognized. Gregory had invited me with a casual, "You can come by if you want," as if I were a neighbor, not his mother. I told myself not to go. But Ellie texted me that morning. "Please come. I want you there." So I baked a lemon chiffon cake, Paige's favorite, though she'd never thanked me for it, and drove over just before 5. The driveway was full. I parked down the block. My knees ached by the time I reached the porch. Inside, it was all bright lights and noise. Paige was wearing a sequin dress. Gregory was already on his second drink. They barely acknowledged me. I stood awkwardly by the coat rack holding my cake. No one offered to take it. No one offered to take my coat. After a few minutes, I found the kitchen. Placed the cake in a corner of the counter, out of the way. Then I tried to blend in. Stay out of the way. But Paige had other plans. "Marjorie!" she called, far too loud. "Can you help clear the plates? We're doing the next round of food." I froze. People turned, laughed softly. One woman whispered something to her husband. I nodded. "I can help," I said softly. I carried 3 trays back and forth, refilled wine glasses, wiped crumbs from the counter. Gregory didn't stop me. Not once did he say, "Let me, Mom." Not once did he offer me a seat. At one point, I bent to pick up a dropped fork, and someone brushed past me and muttered, "I thought she was hired help." That one stung, not because of what they said, but because no one corrected them, not Gregory, not Paige. Not even Ellie, though her face turned pale when she heard it. After dinner, Paige tapped her glass. "I just want to say thank you to everyone who made tonight so beautiful," she said, beaming. She raised her wine. "To family, those who show up in the ways that matter." Her eyes met mine for half a second, then moved on. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't speak. I waited for my moment, because I knew something no one else in that room did. I'd been to the bank. I'd pulled the statements. I knew Paige had transferred money from an account that didn't belong to her. Gregory had used my name to open a second mortgage I never signed. I knew, but I said nothing because I was done speaking where no one listened. As people began leaving, Paige handed me a trash bag. "Would you mind?" "We're exhausted. I took it." Tied it, placed it by the bin. Then I walked back inside, found Ellie, and kissed her forehead. "You okay?" she whispered. "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it, because in their attempt to make me feel small, they'd revealed something bigger. They thought I was weak. Invisible. They thought I had no teeth left, but I had patience, and records, and a memory like a vault. That night, back home, I opened the little green notebook again. I flipped to the last entry. Then I turned the page and began a new list. I started at dawn. The attic was cold and smelled of cedar, old linen, and something softer, dust mixed with memory. I hadn't opened the big metal file box in years. It sat under a yellowed quilt, tucked behind Frank's army trunk. I dragged it toward the light. The latch clicked open with a tired snap. Inside folders labeled in my own handwriting. Mortgage, medical, Frank, pension, Gregory, college loans. I flipped through them page by page, not looking for anything specific, just waiting for something to whisper. Look again. At mid-morning I found it a deed, stamped, signed, notarized, dated May 14, 1998. Owner Marjorie Klein, the lake cabin. I'd forgotten we even still had it. Frank had built it himself, board by board. We used to go up every summer until Gregory started high school and declared it boring. We never sold it. Or so I thought. I grabbed my phone and called the county clerk's office in Hancock. Hi, I'm trying to verify property ownership on parcel Fund 488B. I said, my voice even. Can I get your name?
Ma'am, the woman asked. I gave it. She tapped keys, paused.
That parcel is under the name Marjorie Klein, she said. My breath caught. No, I said. There must be a mistake. I have the deed. It's in my name. There was a title transfer 3 years ago, she said. Filed electronically. I forced my voice to stay calm. Can you send me the full transfer record? Yes, but I'll need proof of identity. I'll fax it in an hour. I hung up, sat back, stared at the deed in my hand. Gregory had transferred the cabin without telling me. Without my signature, that was forgery, fraud, a felony, and he knew I didn't check up there anymore. He'd picked the one property I wouldn't notice. I stared at Frank's name, faded but still legible in blue ink. This wasn't just betrayal. It was desecration. I drove straight to the tax assessor's office. Can I see the historical records for this parcel? I asked, trying not to shake. They printed them. The most recent bill had been forwarded to Gregory's home address. Paid on time. No red flags. That was the brilliance of it. The quietness. If I hadn't gone digging, I'd have never known. Back home, I laid both deeds side by side. The original in my hand, the digital copy emailed to me. Signatures didn't match. His was squiggly flat. Mine, forged. They'd submitted it online with a typed name. No notary. It shouldn't have been valid. But no one checks unless someone complains. And I hadn't complained. Until now. I pulled out the green notebook. New section, Lake Cabin Theft Timeline, May 1998 original deed, notarized. July 2021 digital transfer filed under Gregory. Dec 2024 found original copy. Jan 2025 verification requested. Underneath, I wrote as, do not confront. Yes! The next morning, I met Ellie for cocoa. We sat in the back corner of the cafe away from anyone who might notice us. She handed me a bracelet she'd made. Plastic beads, tiny letters, still here. I touched it gently. I need you to keep something safe, I said. I handed her a copy of the original deed. Her eyes widened. This is important, Grandma. It is, I said. But more than that, I trust you. She nodded. Didn't ask questions. Just tucked it into her backpack like it was treasure. I left the cafe with steadier steps than I'd had in months. They thought they'd taken everything. But they hadn't taken my memory. Or my proof. Or my will. The world may not believe the elderly can fight back. But I was preparing. Not with anger. With precision. Sleep became a stranger. Each night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the light from the street lamps crawl across the walls like ghosts. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, like walking barefoot across shattered glass. The furnace clicked on. The house groaned softly, like it too remembered better days. Frank's side of the bed was still untouched. His pillow flat from time. His scent gone. But his voice came back that night. It was a memory so vivid, I could almost hear him whisper. Silence is grace, Margie. But never mistake it for surrender. Second I got up, wrapped my robe around me, made tea, then forgot to drink it. Instead, I pulled out the green notebook again. And a pen. I made a list.
The lake cabin.
3 bank transfers. Access to my main checking account. My place at the Thanksgiving table. My dignity. At Paige's birthday. Then I made a new list. I haven't taken. My voice. My documents. My timey. My name. I underlined the last one twice. I opened my laptop. Logged into the county recorder's site. Double-checked all property records. Then checked the IRS site, set up notifications on any future tax filings using my SSN. I signed into the bank app. Created read-only PDFs of every questionable transaction. Uploaded them to a password-protected drive. I made a copy of my will, wrote a note on top less pending review, then I opened a blank document, typed the first line box to whom it may concern. My name is Marjorie Klein. It wasn't a letter of rage. It was a map, a record, proof that I saw what they tried to do, and that I wasn't afraid anymore. The clock blinked 3:42 a.m. I printed the files, filed them into a new red folder labeled contingency. I placed that folder inside a larger manila envelope, wrote one word across it in block letters. I sealed it, placed it under the loose floorboard in the hallway closet, the one no one else knew about. By dawn, I stood on the porch watching the sky shift from indigo to ash gray. Snow had started to fall, light, steady, the kind that stays. My breath fogged the glass of the storm door. Each inhale sharper than the last. I hadn't slept, but I felt more awake than I had in months. To Ellie texted at 8017 Amandron's grandma, "Can I come by after school?" I replied, "Yes, bring your sketchbook," as she was the only one I trusted with pieces of my plan. Not to act, not to interfere, just to witness, and maybe one day to tell the story, right? 2. I brewed coffee, wrote 3 more lists, called the county legal clinic and asked about property dispute consultation, booked an appointment under my maiden name. That night, I lit a candle on Frank's side of the bed. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'm not angry. I'm just ready." It was never about revenge. It was about memory, dignity, and truth. And I was done waiting for someone else to give it back to me. They didn't notice the first lock I changed. It was digital, an online portal connected to the secondary savings account. Gregory had access for years, said it made bill paying easier. I believed him. But now, I went in, created a new password and revoked his permissions. No notice, no sound, just a single click. The account balance wasn't huge, maybe $7, but it was mine. Next, I called the utility companies, had all statements redirected to my name only, removed Gregory's email, updated the security questions. I even added 2-factor authentication. Again, no alert went out. But I knew Paige would eventually ask, "Did the water bill go through?" And I knew the answer would be, "We don't have access anymore." Then I canceled the joint credit card. It was one I rarely used, but Gregory charged groceries, school fees, and once, a cruise deposit I never agreed to. I left a voicemail with the bank. "This is Marjorie Klein. Cancel account ending in 5849. Do not issue replacement cards. Close immediately." They did. 3 days later, I saw a failed charge on the online log, a 3D12 at a wine subscription service. I smiled, paused, then kept going. The biggest move was the power of attorney. I hadn't signed the version Gregory gave me, but I knew from the bank clerk's tone that something was on file. So I made an appointment with a lawyer downtown, Mrs. Langford, mid-50s, sharp, and didn't blink when I said, "I believe my son forged legal control over assets I still own." She looked me in the eye. "Do you have original documentation?" I handed her the green notebook, the deed, and the canceled checks. She read in silence, then nodded once. "We'll resend everything on Monday." I left her office lighter. Not free, but on the way. That night, I took out a small box labeled Frank letters. Inside were notes he'd written me over the years. Scraps from lunch boxes. A card from our 20th anniversary. I found the one I'd been thinking about. It read, "If they ever forget who you are, remind them. Not with noise, but with grace." I slipped it into my purse, just in case. Then, Gregory called once. "Hey, Mom? Weird thing. Our card's not working. Paige says maybe the bank flagged it." I kept my voice even. Might be worth checking." He paused. "Also, can you resend the utility login? I think Paige got locked out." "I'm not sure I have it anymore," I said. "I'll take care of it." Another pause. "Long, okay? Thanks." We hung up, and that was it. No confrontation, no accusation. Just quiet unraveling. Ellie came by on a rainy Wednesday. She wore a yellow slicker, her hair damp. We drank cocoa again. No words for a while. Then she leaned in. "Dad and Mom are acting weird." "Like they're scrambling?" I said nothing, but she watched me closely.
Grandma, was it you?
I sipped, then smiled. Some things don't need applause. That night, I deleted the old shared calendar, the one where they scheduled my doctor visits without asking. I booked my own, then set up a new trust, a revocable, private. I named Ellie the primary beneficiary, the lake cabin the bonds, and the rest. In the notes, I wrote S because she remembers. The knock came at 8:03 a.m. I had just poured my coffee, still in my robe. Gregory stood at the door. No greeting, no smile. Behind him, Paige in full makeup and fire-red lips. arms crossed like she owned the oxygen around her. I opened the door halfway. "Morning," I said. Gregory didn't return the pleasantry. "Can we talk?" I didn't move, just held the door open an inch more. They stepped in. He sat at the dining table without asking. Paige remained standing, scanning the living room like a hawk. "So," Gregory began, "we've noticed some things." I raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "The bank accounts, the credit card, the trust, the lake cabin." I sipped my coffee. It tasted especially rich this morning. "I see." A Paige leaned in. "You've made changes, quietly, without informing us." "I wasn't aware I needed permission," I replied. Gregory flinched. "You gave us access?" "Years ago." "No," I corrected. "I allowed it." "Briefly, for convenience. That doesn't mean permanence." He exhaled. "Mom, this isn't fair." "Neither was transferring property behind my back," I said. The room stilled. Paige shifted. "That was, look, it was a paperwork misunderstanding." I turned, walked to the cabinet, and retrieved a folder, set it on the table neatly, deliberately. Notarized deed from 1998, tax logs, electronic transfer record you filed in 2021, forgery withdrawals, 3 unauthorized charges, copies of legal revocation, and my new will. Gregory paled. Paige reached for the folder. I moved it slightly. "You can look, but you can't take it." 2 silence. Then Gregory's voice? Small. "So, what happens now?" I met his eyes. "Now? Nothing more. You've been removed." Quietly. "Legally, completely." He shook his head. "But we're your family." I nodded. "You were?" Paige exploded. "This is a setup." "You've turned our daughter against us. You've been planning this?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked at my son. "I gave you everything."
My time, my home.
My name. "And when I had nothing left to give, you took anyway." They sat stunned. No shouting, no slamming, just the weight of what they no longer controlled. "You'll regret this," Paige whispered. I smiled gently. "No, dear. I regret trusting people who saw kindness as weakness." Gregory stood. His voice trembled. "You're choosing Ellie over us." "I'm choosing myself." Finally, after 70 years of choosing everyone else first. He didn't argue, didn't apologize. Just left. As I watched them walk to their car, I felt no thrill. No vengeance. Just space. Clear air. Room to breathe. Kudo Ellie texted that night. They came home furious. I didn't say a word. Sai replied, good. You don't owe them noise. Just truth." The next morning, I mailed 1 envelope. To my lawyer. Copy of everything signed. 1 copy remained in the fireproof box. Labeled Sester Justice Executed. I had always thought silence was the cruelest sound. After Frank passed, the house was too quiet. Alike the air had stopped remembering how to carry voices. But this silence was different. It was still but not hollow. Quiet but not empty. It felt earned. There were no footsteps rushing up the stairs. No raised voices behind my bedroom door. No morning emails demanding signatures or urgent replies. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the creak of wood expanding in the afternoon sun, and the distant chirp of a lonely bird outside my window. This silence was mine. I made my coffee slower these days. Boiled the water just right. Poured it into the ceramic cup Frank had given me on our 25th anniversary. A chipped, dark green mug with faded letters. Still here. Still yours. I sat at the kitchen table longer too. Not because I was waiting for someone to join me, but because I no longer had to rush. There was peace in that small rebellion. Tiki after Gregory and Paige left that morning, after the confrontation, the folder, the finality, I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when I heard their car pull away and the front gate clatter shut like the end of an old chapter. But the next day, when I opened the hallway closet and saw their old Christmas stockings still hanging on the hook, that's when the ache came. I didn't fall apart. Just paused. Held them in my hand. Gregory's had a crooked reindeer. Paige's was newer, embroidered in cursive of joy. So I folded them gently, placed them in a box marked miscellaneous, and stored it in the attic. No anger, just closure. I spent the rest of that week clearing out drawers, not out of bitterness, but to reclaim space. Found birthday cards never opened. A calendar page had filled for me, month after month, with doctor appointments I hadn't asked for, an instruction manual titled, Preparing for Cognitive Decline. I laughed out loud at that one. Then I cried. My tears weren't for the betrayal. They were for the years I stayed quiet, believing that letting them take over meant love. Believing that being agreeable meant being seen. Ellie came by Saturday morning. No warning, just a knock in her soft voice. "Grandma, you up?" She stepped inside with a paper bag of bagels, her cheeks flushed from the cold. We didn't mention her parents. She didn't ask what happened after they left. She just said,
I brought poppy seed.
"Your favorite." And we sat in the sunroom, where the glass caught the light just enough to warm our knees. She bit into her bagel and sighed. God, I miss this house. I looked around. The old lace curtains, Frank's bookshelf, the rocking chair no one sat in but me. I missed it too, I said. Later, we went outside. The garden was a mess, winter-worn and drooping. But Ellie clapped her hands and said, "Let's fix it. You always said the best time to plant is when no one expects anything to grow." We worked for 2 hours. Pulling weeds, turning soil, tucking new bulbs into the cold earth. My knees ached, my hands trembled slightly from the cold. But I hadn't felt more alive in months. Ellie hummed while she worked. Some old folk tune I couldn't name. The breeze carried the scent of damp mulch and distant honeysuckle. The sun kept dipping behind clouds, like it too wasn't sure it was ready to come out. To inside, she helped me rearrange the books. "I want to make a corner that feels like you," she said. We pulled down every book I hadn't touched in years. Some were musty. Others still had Frank's tiny pencil notes in the margins. Ellie held one up. "Letters to My Daughter," by Maya Angelou, and said, "You should write your own version of this." I shook my head. I wouldn't know where to start. She grinned. "You already did. It's all in the green notebook." That night, after she left, I opened the notebook again, not to document what was taken, but to reflect on what remained. I titled the new pages, "What I Reclaimed." Zan, I wrote, "My time, my rhythm, my choice, my joy, my voice, my quiet, my bloodline worth saving." Then I sat back. Listened to the night air settle against the windows. No sirens, no interruptions. Just the gentle sound of wind brushing the eaves and the clock ticking on the mantel. I didn't need more noise. Or more people. Or more apologies that never came. I needed this. A soft place to land. A chair that knew my shape. A morning without demands. 2, I made a bowl of soup, watched it steam, ate slowly, remembering my mother's hands when she'd ladle broth on cold nights. I wondered how she stayed calm when no one noticed her sacrifices. Maybe this was the answer. You don't wait for thanks. You don't wait for justice to knock on your door. You build it. Quietly. In the bones of your own home. 2 before bed, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Frank used to do that when someone was traveling. He called it his light of return. But this one wasn't for anyone to come back. It was for me, for the parts of myself I'd finally let back in. I watched it flicker, felt the warmth stretch across my knuckles. Then I closed the notebook and smiled. The cabin stood still, wrapped in the hush of early spring. It was smaller than I remembered, just 2 rooms and a screened porch. But in its simplicity, I felt something vast, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Ownership. Not of land, not of property, of myself. I slid the key into the lock, the metal cool against my fingers. The door groaned open, and dust danced in the sunlight like quiet confetti. I didn't rush to sweep or open windows. I just stood there, letting the silence wrap around me like a worn shawl. This was where Frank and I had planned to grow old. He with his fishing rods, me with my books. Life had other ideas. But the dream had never left me. It had just waited, like a forgotten seed under snow. I unpacked slowly, not out of exhaustion, but intention. Each item held history. A mug from our honeymoon in Maine. The quilt my mother stitched when I turned 60. The green notebook, now thick with pages of reclaiming. And of course the books. Always the books. They lined the walls in haphazard stacks. Poetry, philosophy, memoirs of women who'd been bruised by time but never broken. Their spines faced outward, proud and worn. I didn't alphabetize, didn't sort by genre. I just arranged them the way my heart remembered first loves. Hard lessons, quiet victories. Pete, the old workbench Frank used for fixing lures, became my lending shelf. No digital checkouts, no barcodes. Just a handwritten sign that says, "Take what you need. Return what you can. Leave something kind." Cue on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, I'd open the door, boil a pot of tea, and wait. Sometimes no one came. Other times, a stranger would step inside unsure, then slowly relax into the smell of books and cinnamon. I didn't ask names, didn't demand stories, but they told them anyway. A father learning to read again after a stroke, a teenage girl hiding from her stepfather, a retired librarian searching for one last copy of a lost childhood book. They left notes tucked inside chapters, doodles, pressed flowers, and once a Polaroid of a woman smiling beside a dog with 3 legs. To Ellie came every month. Always unannounced, always with lemon bars and something new. A paintbrush, A wildflower bundle, a story about a college professor who reminded her of me. She'd stretch out on the porch floor, arms behind her head, and say, "Grandma, I think the trees remember you." One afternoon, while I dusted the shelves, she stood on a stool and painted a quote across the top beam in soft blue letters. Kindness doesn't mean surrender, push. It stopped me in my tracks. She looked down. "You said it once." I wrote it down. It stayed with me. I touched the letters, felt them settle into me like roots. Nights came early in the woods. I'd sit with a blanket over my lap, journal in hand, fire popping in the hearth. I wrote letters I'd never send. To Gregory, to Paige, to the woman I used to be. I didn't write with bitterness. I didn't need to. I just told the truth, that I loved, that I gave, that I waited too long to be seen, and that it was okay. Because in the end, I saw myself, and I chose not to disappear. One night, I found a note in the book return box. No envelope, no signature, just a scrap of paper, creased and worn. It said, "Thank you for being a mirror. You helped me find myself again." See, I pressed it between the pages of my notebook. Sometimes that's all we need. Not forgiveness, not recognition, just the knowledge that our survival became someone else's map. Spring gave way to summer. The wild grass grew tall, and so did I. I painted the porch railing, hung wind chimes made from mismatched silverware, watched squirrels steal strawberries from my garden boxes. One afternoon, I found Ellie asleep in the hammock, a novel resting on her chest. She looked so much like her mother at that age, before everything changed. I didn't wake her. I just sat nearby crocheting, grateful that this version of family was quiet, deliberate, and entirely chosen. I no longer waited for the past to explain itself. I no longer needed closure from those who thrived on keeping doors half open. I had closed mine, gently, permanently. In its place, I built a window. One evening, as twilight settled over the trees, I stood at the water's edge. The lake shimmered violet, rippling with secrets. I whispered, "Frank, I did it. I didn't vanish. I grew." A breeze stirred the pine branches, and I swear for a moment he smiled through the stillness. I went inside, lit a candle, and opened the notebook. Last page. No title. I just wrote of ours. My legacy isn't what I left behind. It's what I chose to carry forward, quietly, bravely, on my own terms. Folks, if this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt erased, undervalued, or pushed aside, know this: you are not invisible. You are not done. You are not alone. Tell me, Asia, have you ever had to choose peace over people? To start over in silence? To share your story in the comments? Let's make this a circle of quiet strength, one voice at a time.